Paul Morphy has a little fun with his opponent in this game that is just classic Paul Morphy, where development is the rule of the day, and he's a whole lot better at getting his pieces out than his opponent. This is really a beautiful game from a legendary player. His opponent is someone named Alexander Buford Meek, and I believe this game was played in Mobile, Alabama, but I'm not 100% sure. The reason I think that's the case, it says Mobile, spelled mobile, same spelling. And Alabama and New Orleans are fairly close to each other. And this was before his London tour. So I believe that's where this game is being played. And Morphy played this opponent more than once. Morphy has white in this game. Meek has black. And let us jump right in and take a look. Morphy begins with e4. Black begins with e5 and f4, the King's Gambit. Not a big surprise. Morphy liked to play the King's Gambit. Pawn takes, knight f3, and g5. This is the classical approach from black, and it's a good approach even to this very day. It's a good line for black. Bishop c4. Morphy, of course, puts his emphasis on getting his pieces out instead of the main line today is usually h4. But bishop c4, aiming directly at the f7 square, which is the weakest square in black's position because only the king defends it. No other piece defends the square, so f7 is very sensitive in black's position. Morphy aims right at it. Bishop to g7 from black. He could play g4. And in this line, white often gambits an entire piece with castling, pawn takes, queen takes. And after queen to f6, d3, knight c6, bishop takes f4, white probably doesn't have enough for the piece, although you wouldn't want to play this again against a player like Morphy. But his opponent just plays bishop to g7, placing the bishop on the long diagonal. Now h4. From Morphy, trying to undermine this point and on g5. G4 is played by black. If he takes here, I mean, look at these terrible pawns, all sorts of weaknesses in black's position. So he just advances, but Morphy now plays knight to g5. So now the knight and bishop are aiming at f7. The knight is supported by the pawn at h4, and there's a lot of pressure in on black's position. The best move here is probably d5. This is a common theme in the King's Gambit where black gives up this d-pawn, but actually reduces the pressure a little bit. Knight to h6, knight to c3. White has a little bit of an advantage here, but the idea, of course, is that this bishop is now able to develop. But instead, he plays knight to h6, just directly defending the pawn at f7. Now d4 from Morphy, allowing the bishop at c1 to directly threaten the pawn at f4. And more important than the pawn is just the square itself, that weak dark square. So looking at this position, black notices that this knight at g5 does not have a lot of places to move. All the potential squares, like h3 and f3, are all threatened. So he plays f6, asking Morphy, what are you going to do with this knight? It looks like it's trapped. Well, Morphy says, I'm going to do nothing with that knight. I'm going to leave it right there. And he goes ahead and takes on f4, not afraid to sacrifice the piece. Black grabs the knight. Now bishop takes g5. Morphy has one pawn in exchange for a piece, but he has a lot of pressure. And we see this queen is trapped. In order to save the queen, black has to play bishop to f6. And we would expect that Morphy would go ahead and take the knight, restoring the material balance. And that was okay. But instead, he keeps up the pressure with queen to d2. He wants to leave this bishop here, and if it's taken, to take with the pawn, which is what happens. Bishop takes, now pawn takes, gaining a tempo against this knight. And look at this king, is really, really barren. Knight to f7. The knight and the queen both aim at the g5 pawn. Bishop takes f7 check. He gives up that nice bishop, but now look at black's king, completely out in the open. And at the same time, look at black's development. Every single piece still on the back rank on its original square. So even a piece sacrifice is not too worrisome for Morphy. First, he plays queen to f4 check. Notice this f6 square is also a problem for black because this pawn attacks it. So he can't block the check with this queen. The king moves to g8, and now he simply castles. But now that threatens checkmate on f7, queen to f7 checkmate. So queen to e7 to cover that square. Now knight to c3 from Morphy, threatening knight to d5, hitting the queen. hitting the c7 square and causing all sorts of problems. c6 from black to control that square. Now Morphy plays rook a to e1, and every single one of Morphy's pieces is now developed. And whereas black only has this queen on e7 and a trapped rook here on h8. So black plays d6. The idea is now he can develop the bishop. Maybe, oh, that's a bad angle. Bad line. Develop the bishop, develop the knight, and maybe get into the game. But Morphy's next move in this position is a decisive blow. Can you find it? That's right. He plays this brilliant move. Boom. Knight to d5, offering a second minor piece, and black completely resigned in this position. There's just nothing he can do. Obviously, he would have to take the knight because if the queen moves, he plays knight to f6 check, and there's all kinds of other threats of mate. In order to cover these two squares, the queen would have to go back here, and then knight f6 is a fork, all kinds of trouble. So he would have to take the knight, at which point Morphy would simply recapture, and these three heavy pieces completely destroy black's position. There is no way that he can move the queen away from capture and stop mate on f8 or f7. It cannot be done. And even if he tries to give up the queen, he just ignore it, like queen to f7 mate. So a beautiful game from Morphy against admittedly inferior opposition, but it's just so amazing to see how he was the master of development in chess. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog. See you again soon. Bye.